I was living in a small college town, the kind of place where everything is close together. My apartment complex sat only a short walk away from the downtown area, where the bars and restaurants were. Most nights, the streets were busy with students, young people, and groups heading home after hanging out. It wasn't the type of place you'd normally expect anything sinister. That night, I was up late studying, textbooks open, notes scattered across my desk. After a while, I needed a break, so I decided to step outside to smoke a cigarette. It was a quiet weekday night, not much going on. I carried my book outside with me and sat on the steps of our porch. The air was cool, the kind of air that wakes you up just enough to keep going. I remember thinking it was almost peaceful. You know, streets were mostly empty by that time, though every now and then you could hear laughter in the distance or the faint sound of a car driving by. That's when I noticed my neighbor coming up the walkway. She lived in the apartment just one unit over, though hers was on the ground floor. I didn't know her very well, just enough to recognize her face. She had been out that night, and from the way she moved, I could tell she'd probably had a few drinks. Nothing unusual in a college town. She walked up to her door, unlocked it, and went inside. I didn't think anything of it. But then, almost as if he appeared out of thin air, a man walked up to her door and knocked. I hadn't seen him earlier, hadn't heard footsteps approaching. He just seemed to step out of the shadows. At first I figured maybe he was someone she knew, maybe a friend walking her home. But as I watched, something about the scene didn't sit right. It was after 2:30 in the morning. Who comes knocking on a stranger's door at that hour? She opened the door and I could hear him introducing himself. It struck me immediately as odd. Introductions don't usually happen on someone's doorstep in the middle of the night. The whole situation felt off, like puzzle pieces that didn't fit together. I stayed where I was, pretending to be focused on my textbook, but in reality, I was paying close attention. The two of them talked for over 10 minutes. I could see from her body language that she wasn't comfortable. She leaned against the door frame, almost like she didn't want to step outside but didn't know how to end the conversation either. Later, she told me she felt awkward and unsure of what to do, but in the moment I could already sense her unease. What unsettled me even more were his actions. He wasn't just talking, he was invading her personal space. At one point I saw him reach up and touch her hair. Slowly, deliberately, not once but at least 3 times. He'd shift closer, inch by inch, like he was trying to close the gap between them without her noticing. Each movement made my stomach tighten a little more. This wasn't just a casual late-night conversation. Something darker was going on. Realized then that my presence might be the only thing keeping him from pushing further, so I made sure he knew I was there. I turned the pages of my textbook louder than I needed to, dropped my pen once on purpose, shifted in my seat. Little noises to remind him that someone was watching. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed him glance toward me. And just like that, he vanished. One moment he was standing at her door, leaning closer, talking softly. And the next, he was gone. He didn't say goodbye, didn't make an excuse, didn't walk past me toward the street. He simply disappeared into the night as though he had melted back into the shadows he came from. At first I wasn't sure what had just happened, but the more I thought about it, the more I knew it wasn't normal. Something about him had been wrong from the very beginning. And the fact that he left so suddenly made it even clearer. My neighbor and I ended up calling the police just to be safe. We explained what had happened, gave a description of the man, and told them about the odd interaction. A few days later, both of us were asked to meet with a sketch artist. Sitting there describing him was unsettling. I replayed every detail. In my head, his face, his hair, his eyes, the way he stood, the way he moved closer to her without invitation. Piece by piece, the image came together. And when the sketch was finally finished and released to the public, things took a turn none of us expected. Almost immediately, the police started receiving calls. Dozens of them. People recognized him. The man wasn't just some random stranger wandering around late at night. He was someone much worse. As the reports came in, a picture of who he really was began to form. It turned out this man had been targeting women leaving bars late at night. He had a pattern. He would follow them home or approach them outside, pretending to be friendly, sometimes even pretending to be a cab driver offering them a ride. Once he had someone alone, that's when things got dangerous. The realization hit me like a brick. The neighbor I barely knew, the young woman who just happened to live one apartment over, had been seconds away from becoming one of his victims. The only reason she wasn't was because she lived close enough to walk home. He didn't get the chance to use his usual trick, and maybe, just maybe, because I was sitting there flipping pages loud enough for him to hear, he backed off. When the police finally caught him, it was chilling to think about how many lives he had already harmed and how many more he might have if things had gone differently. That night, what seemed like a small decision on my part, staying outside a little longer paying attention, ended up mattering more than I ever realized. Looking back now, I think about how often we pass strangers on the street without a second thought. How easy it is to ignore the little warning signs because we don't want to get involved. But sometimes being present, being aware, and trusting your instincts can make all the difference. I'll never forget the way he looked standing in that doorway, the way the air seemed heavier while he was there, the way everything about the scene screamed danger even if you couldn't quite put your finger on why. And I'll never forget the relief on my neighbor's face when she realized just how lucky she had been. It's a reminder that danger doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it shows up quietly in the middle of an ordinary night wearing a friendly smile. And sometimes the only thing standing in its way is another person who chooses to pay attention. If you found this story gripping and want to hear more real stories that remind us of the hidden threads in everyday life, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and join us here at True Threads, where we bring real stories to life.